coming to my talk about leveraging features in Ubuntu for privilege escalation. So we'll get into it. The obligatory kind of who am I slide. So my name's Elliot. I'm from the UK but living in Zurich in Switzerland. So this was quite a long journey to get here, but it's a cool city, so I'm glad I came. Bit of my background, kind of ex-pen tester, so I was doing this for a long time. Internal security engineer for a while, and then moved into research full time. I like skateboarding, snowboarding, drinking good craft beer. So I found a couple of good bars here, like Enox was a nice one, and Noctem I think, which is all of the beers are named after cats, which is pretty cool. And that's also my cat there. And then I also play way too much RuneScape. So if there's any RuneScape players, then hit me up. Old school RuneScape, not RuneScape free. And then just to kind of briefly introduce the company that I work for, Sneak. For those that don't know us, we're a software security company, and we aim to provide developers and security teams with the tools that they need to stay safe while building software. And we have kind of just a wide range of products, ranging from dependency scanning to static analysis to AppSec risk management, container scanning. It's not a sales pitch, but if you want to know more, you can come and speak to me. And within Sneak, I work in a small team called the Security Labs, and we basically focus on kind of high-impact security issues that affect developer and open source security. We found issues in a variety of platforms and products, ranging from Docker to Terraform to Hugging Face to the topic of today's talk, which is Ubuntu. So kind of just what are the objectives of the talk today? So I'd kind of like to give you all an overview of like a security research journey from start to finish. So if anybody's kind of looking to get into doing security research, kind of how we approach this, and what a typical project might look like. And then also kind of demonstrate how some of the privilege escalation vulnerabilities can be found within Linux operating systems. And then it will be a deep dive into the two specific CVs that are relevant for this local privilege escalation. So kind of looking at the agenda, we'll first just look at kind of typical Linux LPEs, and then look into exploiting Ubuntu 24.04, and then summarize and all of that. So first of all, what is an LPE? So like a local privilege escalation occurs when a vulnerability or a chain of vulnerabilities allows a user with local access to perform basically actions that are for or have privileges of something that they shouldn't have. And we can typically group privilege escalation vulnerabilities into two types. We have horizontal privilege escalation, where kind of user one may be able to gain the access of another user at the same privilege level. So two regular users, Bob and Alice. Bob may be able to execute commands as Alice or read her files. And then we have vertical privilege escalation, which is kind of more interesting, and it's the scenario where we gain higher privileges than what we're normally at the current level. So Bob, a regular user, is able to execute commands as the root user. And why might we want to elevate privileges? So I mean, this can include kind of like accessing sensitive data, so data that was previously inaccessible to our user. We may be on a machine and we want to gain persistence, so we may backdoor some kind of key system components or make some other changes that allow us to persist. Or it could also be for lateral movement. So maybe we've compromised one machine in a network, and then we'll be able to extract password hashes, private keys, or other credentials that the attacker can use to move laterally within the network to compromise additional hosts beyond the initial target. So kind of classic LPE vectors, these can often include misconfigurations and exploits. So the misconfigurations, this can be things like weak file permissions, which can allow for unauthorized access or modification to system or sensitive files. We might have pseudo misconfigurations that grant users unintended root permissions. We may have misconfigured set UID or set GID binaries that can be abused to execute actions with elevated privileges based on the user who owns the binary that's being executed rather than the user that's actually executing the binary. And then on the other hand, we kind of have the typical exploits and vulnerabilities. So things like kernel exploits, which target flaws within the operating system kernel to gain complete control over the system. And we can also exploit kind of privileged services, so things that might be running as root. For example, we may have an Apache or MySQL server, with things like buffer overflows, path traversals, use after freeze, race conditions. We may be able to execute arbitrary code in those processes to elevate privileges. So let's kind of dive into the topic of today's talk and go over our approach to finding privilege escalation bugs in Ubuntu. And in this case, we're not going to rely on these kind of typical vectors that rely on the traditional vulnerabilities, but we're going to look at kind of combining a series of so-called gadgets together to achieve our goal. So kind of let's see how. So first, let's talk about features in the system. And there are many core components of Ubuntu, but the first that we're going to discuss is called DBus. And DBus stands for desktop bus, and this is basically a message bus system that enables communication between different processes on Linux systems. It facilitates inter-process communication, or often known as IPC, by allowing both privileged and unprivileged processes to exchange information via remote procedural calls. And this mechanism is essential for the smooth operation of various system components and applications that need to interact with each other. So if an attacker can exploit vulnerabilities in the DBus system, or in the way that they handle DBus messages, they may be able to craft specific messages to root level processes or services, which could lead to the execution of arbitrary code with elevated privileges. So let's have a very brief look at the DBus architecture. There are two main types of buses. We have the system bus and the session bus. The system bus is for services that operate across the system and need root level permissions. So this will be things like network or power management. And then we have the session bus, and this is specific to kind of a user session. And this is more for applications like file managers or desktop environments. Then we have the core components of DBus. So we have the bus daemon, and this acts as a central hub that routes all messages between clients. Without this, the processes would need to have to directly communicate with each other, and that's not the case with DBus. And then we have clients and services. So clients are any processes that need to communicate over the DBus, and these can be applications or system services. And then we have DBus services, which they provide specific functionality like adjusting network settings or managing device drivers. And then DBus uses different types of messages for communication. We have basically method calls, and these are requests to perform a certain action. So it might be to turn on the Wi-Fi. And then we have signals, and these are broadcast messages which a client can subscribe to. So we may get, for example, the Wi-Fi is disconnected. And then we have replies, and these are the responses to the method calls that we invoke. And then when it comes to security, DBus enforces access controls using policy rules. And these basically define which users and processes can send messages to which services, and it adds an additional layer of security to the DBus system. So hopefully the basic DBus demo will work. And it's just a very basic demo that kind of just shows how we can lock the screen in Ubuntu using DBus. So we send a message, and then that goes over, and we can interact with the system via this message bus. Perfect. So then when we're on the system, how do we investigate what has been registered on the DBus? So we can use a utility called busctl, and with busctl we can basically list the various services via the list command, and then we can specify the -- system option or flag to exclude any user services because these are not going to be privileged. We don't care about those when it comes to aiming for privilege escalation. And then once we've found like an interesting interface that we want to explore, we can inspect its methods to see what functions it's exposing via the introspect command. And then there we have an example on the screen where we can kind of introspect the messages or the methods that are available on the login1 DBus interface. In addition to using busctl, we can use the utility dfeat. And this basically is a graphical user interface to explore and interact with DBus interfaces. It makes it a little bit easier, and provides us the capability to directly invoke the methods on the interface. And there also exists a more recent tool called sspy, but in this case we just use DBus. So now that we've talked a little bit about DBus and what it is and how it works, let's look at our approach. So we'll start by trying to find some bugs in Ubuntu. So we'll first start by listing all the services registered on the DBus system bus to identify some potential targets. And then by reviewing these services, we can look for interesting methods that may present an attack path. Specifically, or especially those that perform actions over some privilege boundary, like reading or writing files or starting or stopping system services. And to identify these vulnerabilities, we can leverage code review techniques to analyze how services handle incoming DBus messages. Or additionally, we can employ dynamic analysis tools like strace to monitor what system calls are being made by services during the DBus interaction. This can reveal kind of unintended behaviors that are not evident from looking at a code review aspect alone. So kind of sometime later, we've been going through the various interfaces and methods via the DBus on a fresh Ubuntu 2404 machine. And we've arrived at one called cups PK helper. So cups PK helper is a utility that wraps around the cups daemon, and it provides some methods for managing and interacting with the cups system on that system. So kind of what even is cups? So cups is the common Unix printing system. It's the de facto printing system for most Unix-based systems, including Linux and Mac OS. And it allows you to manage printers and printing tasks on local or network systems. The core functionality of cups is built around the Internet Printing Protocol, which handles communication between print servers and clients. So let's start to review the methods that we have on the cups PK helper interface. To do this, we're going to leverage the strace utility. And strace is a command line tool which can trace signals and system calls made when a program interacts with the kernel. It can show us the syscalls like read, write, open, and the signals that it receives like sig-sec-v or sig-kill. And this tool is incredibly useful for monitoring what an application or service is doing at the system level, and it helps us debug or analyze its behavior. So during our analysis of the cups PK helper interface, we found two interesting methods named server get settings and server set settings. And one of the things we noticed when we were invoking server set settings was that the cups daemon was being restarted. So now the restarting of the cups daemon is actually quite obvious when you think about it. So as the name suggests, it's used to set cup server configuration values with configuration values. And then with strace, we were able to observe that when we invoked server set settings, it would write our config options to the file etc cups.config.d, and then it would restart cups for those changes to actually be reflected or reloaded by the cups daemon. And this is great because it gives us as the attacker partial control of cups by giving us a way to set values in the cups configuration file and also a way to restart the cups service, something that under normal circumstances our user is not able to write to that file and it's not able to restart that service. So let's have a look at the cups.d config manual to see if there's any interesting config values that could allow code execution or be a candidate for looking for some future vulnerabilities. And after looking at some of the various config options, one that we arrive at is the listen directive, which is used to specify the Unix socket on which cups is going to listen for connections. And it's quite likely that this is going to be doing some file system operations. So let's attach strace to cups and then see what's happening when the file path, or with the file path that we're able to control. So first we see a call to unlink with the value that we control, followed by a call to bind, which is then followed by a call to chmod, setting the file permissions to 777, world writable, to the path that we are able to control. So this should be quite quick and straightforward, right? So we should just be able to add a listen config option with a value of a symlink that points to etc password. And then set this via server set settings, DBus method, and then this is going to modify the cups config, restart cups for us. and then it should make Etsy password world writable. And then once that's done, we should be able to just modify our user's UID to 0, and then we should have a privesc. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. So after running our proof of concept with strace attached, we can see some errors. And first, our call to unlink gave a permission denied. And this is actually a good thing, as this would have deleted our symlink. And similarly, the call to chmod also fails with a permission denied error on a symlink, which is owned by our user. And this is pretty strange because we own the file. So let's have a look and see what's going on here. So we have another component called AppArmor. And AppArmor is a Linux kernel security module which enhances system security by restricting programs to a specific set of resources through the use of policies. And these profiles define what resources an application can and cannot access, effectively creating a security boundary around each application. For example, consider a web server. With AppArmor, we can create a profile that allows the web server to read its configuration files, serve content from its web route, and communicate over the network on ports 80 and 443 for our HTTP and TLS traffic. But at the same time, the profile can prevent the web server from accessing sensitive files like system configuration files, users' home directories that it doesn't need to function. And this means that if our web server is compromised, the attacker cannot access or modify critical parts of the system outside of what the profile permits. So by using these profiles, AppArmor limits the capabilities of programs to reduce the risk of them being exploited to harm the system. And this approach is similar to what SE Linux offers, but many people find AppArmor is profile-based approach a bit simpler to use. So let's explore how AppArmor can restrict files that TCP dump can access. So for example, we have a profile here that specifies that TCP dump is only allowed to execute certain binaries like gzip and bzip2, indicated by the IXR flag in the profile that's on the right-hand side of the screen. And it also prevents access to hidden files and directories in any user's home directory, but it explicitly allows writing to directories owned by the user running TCP dump. And additionally, the profile restricts TCP dump to write files outside of the home directory if the extension is not pcap or similar. So we can actually see this with the example on the bottom left of the screen. So even though dev shm is world writable, TCP dump cannot write to this directory unless the file extension ends in .pcap. So this demonstrates how AppArmor's profile restrictions prevent unauthorized file access, enforcing security policies even in world writable directories. So the AppArmor policy for cupsd grants it read and write access to the /temp directory. However, it only has read, write, lock, and link permissions for subdirectories within /temp if it is the owner of those subdirectories. In our scenario, the testing directory temp stage is owned by my user account and not by root. So consequently, cupsd is not allowed to make changes to this directory, which causes the system call to unlink to fail. And this is actually quite convenient because it's a situation where a security control is actually aiding in our exploitation because without this restriction, the code would still be vulnerable, but it would manifest as a race condition. Whereas in this case, and as it stands, because the unlink operation fails consistently, we have no timing element involved, so that bit is somewhat simplified. The second aspect of the policy impacting our proof of concept is the lack of write access to the /etc directory for cupsd. And this restriction explains why our attempt to change the permissions of /etc/password via a symlink is failing. And it makes perfect sense from a security standpoint because there is no reason for cupsd to read and write to arbitrary files in /etc. So we don't grant it those permissions. So having established why our initial proof of concept has failed, we can now explore alternative options. And it's not all lost because we can now use the AppArmor profile as a guide to identify which directories we can successfully chmod and gain write access. So by carefully reading through the policy, we found that most of the places where we have write permissions are specific to cupsd configuration functionality. For example, we have access to the everything under /etc/cups. So yeah, this is mostly kind of any configuration files that are relevant specifically to cups. So kind of we've transitioned from what seemed like an easily exploitable vulnerability to one with quite limited impact due to some of the security restrictions. And by examining the AppArmor policy, we realized that we can make changes only to cups configurations, cache, or log files. So therefore, we need to pivot our approach, and our goal is to find a way to leverage control over the cups configuration files into something that's more impactful and ultimately allows us for a full root command execution. So let's explore how modifying these specific files might open up new avenues for exploitation within the confines of the current security policies. So to determine kind of what we can accomplish with our current capabilities, the first step is to consult the documentation for the files that we might be able to control. So this includes cupsd.conf, cupsfiles.conf, and several other files that are located within the /etc/cups directory. And while reviewing the documentation, we came across two intriguing directives in the cupsfiles.conf manual page, and this is the group and user directives. These directives are particularly interesting because they allow us to specify the user and group that external programs should use. So to experiment with this possibility, we need to kind of utilize our findings from earlier to successfully change the permissions of /etc/cups/cupsfiles.conf. And then with this, we'll be able to modify the configuration of the cupsfiles.conf file and possibly run external programs with a user that we can control. So kind of before we get into the current exploit approach, there is some hidden complexity in the exploitation process that we haven't discussed yet. And basically, whenever we use the DBus server settings method to change the listen parameter, cups is going to stop functioning correctly. And yeah, while the ch mod call executes successfully, the previous bind call is going to fail because we can't bind to a symlink. So that's going to get checked, and then cups will detect the failure and exit. So in this state, we're unable to make additional changes or to re-exploit the vulnerability, which is quite a significant hurdle in our attack. So to overcome this obstacle, we basically just need to modify our approach somewhat by targeting cupsd configuration file first, and then we proceed to make this file world writable, which allows us to fix our previously inserted malicious listen lines to resemble the original cups configuration, and then we use cups to start it starts cups successfully again, while keeping the cups D configuration file world writable. And then with cups running properly, we can add another additional listen lines to cupsd.conf. And then since cups accepts multiple listen directives, we can then trigger a restart of cups service via the server settings DBus method again on an unrelated and safe configuration value. And then this strategy allows us to safely re-exploit this vulnerability whenever we choose without losing access to cups or disrupting the cups PK helper DBus interface, which requires cups to be operational. So using this method, we can then make etc cups files world writable, and then once we have that, it grants us the ability to add our own user and group configuration lines that we identified in the documentation earlier, moving us a step closer to achieving our goal of a full root command execution. So we've identified that we can set the user and group directives for external programs in the cups configuration files. And at first glance, it might seem straightforward to set both user and group to root, as this would allow us immediate root access once we gain control over these external programs. However, when we attempt to modify the cups configuration file with user root and group root, and then trigger a restart of cups, we'll encounter this error that's on the screen. And this error message basically indicates that using root or any user ID with 0 is explicitly prohibited by the system. And since this method doesn't provide us with the root command execution as we would hope, we still need to find an alternative user to target, which we can use as a stepping stone to get to root. So kind of before diving deeper into our full attack strategy, let's take a second to understand the role of external programs within CUPS. So as already mentioned, CUPS is responsible for managing printing tasks on Unix-like operating systems. And when setting up a printer within CUPS, we use PPD, which is PostScript printer definition files. And these files define the printer's capabilities. So things like paper size, duplex options, the resolution of the printer. And kind of beyond those basic settings, the PPD files also specify the file types that a printer can handle. And since not all printers can interpret every file format, for example, a raw PDF file, the PPD instructs CUPS on how to process different file types. And this ensures that print jobs can be correctly formatted for whichever specific printer is in use. So we have things called filters in CUPS, and these allow us to handle unsupported file formats. And CUPS utilizes these filters to convert files into printer-friendly formats. For instance, we have the PDF tops filter that will convert PDF files to PostScript, allowing printers that don't support PDF files to print them. And then we also have the Fumatic RIP filter, which is a universal filter, and it offers lots of customization options that can be used to influence how print jobs are going to be processed. So understanding these components is crucial because they form the basis of how we can interact and possibly leverage CUPS functionality for our purposes. So building on the understanding of external programs in CUPS, we can now explore how to leverage this for our exploitation needs. So the Fumatic RIP filter stands out due to its Fumatic RIP command line option. And this option allows us to specify a command line that gets executed whenever the filter is used. This capability is particularly interesting for our objective. And interestingly, it's the same technique that was used in the recent CUPS RCE. And it was also assigned a CVE number here. And that's quite strange for me because, I mean, I consider this as more of a gadget. Like it's intended to execute an arbitrary command. So I don't really know why this was considered a vulnerability in the CUPS RCE case. But anyway, let's get to our exploitation strategy. So first, we'll basically create a custom PPD file. And then this file is going to include the Fumatic RIP command line option, containing a command that we want to execute as an arbitrary user that isn't the root user. We then need to register this new printer with our custom PPD file, and conveniently, the CUPS PK helper DBus interface that we identified earlier, it also has a method for registering or adding a printer using a manually specified PPD file. So this is great. And then to trigger the command execution, we just need to submit a print job, for example, a PDF, to our new fictitious printer. And then we can monitor the process and see what happens, basically. So the outcome of this is that we achieve command execution through CUPS. And because we've previously manipulated the user and group directives in the CUPS files configuration, the commands are going to be executed under the privileges of a user and group that we specify, excluding the root user. So our final challenge is to be able to identify a suitable user or group that we can exploit to then escalate to root user. So we have several options that we could use to achieve root access using this arbitrary command execution. So one initial idea would be to set the CUPS external group to disk and use this to modify the actual raw disk on the device, so /dev/sda2 or whatever it happens to be on the device that we are on. And this would work since the file has group ownership, or file has group ownership by disk, and the permissions are set to 660, so it's writable by the group. But it's not the best approach. Like manipulating the raw disk is quite risky, and it can lead to system instability or data loss. So let's try to aim for a more reliable and straightforward approach. So building on our earlier approach, we're going to turn back to the DBus system to identify services that are accessible by specific users or groups other than our original user. And this led us to finding the WPA supplicant interface. And this looks quite promising. So after reviewing the interface's access permissions, we've been able to learn that normal users cannot call methods on the WPA supplicant interface. The root user can own and invoke all of the methods, which is expected, but it's not very helpful because we can't execute things as root. However, the group netdev is allowed to call methods on this interface. So yeah, this presents an opportunity via the group netdev. So by setting our cups external processes to run with the group netdev, we gain the ability to interact with the WPA supplicant interface via DBus. And then after enumeration of the methods on this interface, we discovered a method called createInterface, which is typically used to configure network interfaces for wireless security protocols like WPA or 802.1x. And this createInterface method accepts an argument named config file, and this is basically a path to a WPA supplicant.conf configuration file. And according to the documentation, this configuration file supports an option which allows the loading of shared objects. So these shared objects can be used to extend the functionality of WPA supplicant, such as by adding like custom cryptographic routines. So in order for us to leverage WPA supplicant to achieve our goals, we need to begin by writing a shared object that contains our payload. And for this, we're basically going to set the payload to just set the Python binary to be setUID. And then this approach simplifies obtaining an interactive root shell and also performing our cleanup activities, such as reverting any changes that we made previously to the cups file permissions. And then next we create a WPA supplicant.conf file that references that shared object using the OpenSC engine path option. And then this configuration instructs WPA supplicant to load our shared object when it's initialized. So using our prior exploit, we gain command execution with the netdev group ID. And then with this level of access, we can then call the createInterface method on the WPA supplicant DBus interface, which provides our wireless interface configuration file. And then since WPA supplicant runs as root, it loads our shared object and it's going to execute with root privileges. So let's put this all together. So we found multiple weaknesses which allow us to take partial control over the cups configuration file and run arbitrary restarts of the cups service, neither of which we can do from a normal unprivileged user. And then we found a way to make files in the cups directory world writable before discovering a way to execute commands as arbitrary non-root users when we run a print job. Before we finally found a way in which we can then pivot from the netdev group to theoretically get a full root command execution via creating a fictitious network device. So let's review the actual steps that we need to perform in detail. So first we need to create a staging area in /temp/stage where we put the symbolic links, which we're going to use to target cups. Then we need to call server set settings dbus method to change the cups listen parameter to temp stage cupsd.conf, which is a symlink to etc cups/cupsd.conf. And then after running that file is going to be world writable, and then we can use this to fix up the changes that we made earlier and add additional listen configuration items which point to temp stage cups.conf, cups-files.conf, which is then a symlink to the cups files configuration file. And then we can use server set settings again to restart, to make the restart of the cup service. And After that, we have the cups file with world writable permissions. We can then modify this file to have the group parameter of netdev. We don't actually need to set the user because it's not relevant in this chain. And then we repeat step 4 to trigger a restart of cups, causing the group parameter in cups-files to take effect. And then we stage for WPA supplicant by creating the configuration file that defines the config option which points to our shared object. We create our shared object, and then we basically install the fictitious printer into cups using the printer add with PPD files DBus method. And then this is going to go ahead and we put our foomatic RIP command line, which executes the Python that we want to execute. Then basically we can print a sample PDF using the newly created printer, and then this is going to trigger the Python script, which is going to call the create interface method, which is then going to cause WPA supplicant to load our shared object that we defined in the configuration file, and then this shared object will set Python to be set UID root as soon as it's loaded. And then now we can change Python to be set UID, and we have root on the system once this runs. So we can then have a look at this in action. So we're just going to go ahead and check that we're on the latest version of Ubuntu at the time, and then we run our exploit. And then we've become root, so that's great. So kind of just like what have we achieved here? So we've identified like multiple weaknesses that are not like traditional vulnerabilities in a sense, but by combining and chaining these all together, we've managed to find kind of a high impact privilege escalation. We have kind of the 2 CVEs that were issued for this, one in WPA supplicant, one in cups, and this has been patched now in Ubuntu 24.04.1 and in the cups 2.4.9 or higher. So kind of what can we do in terms of further research? So Ubuntu and other Linux distributions, these are comprised of a complex collection of interconnected components, and there are bound to be more scenarios that can be abused to obtain control over the system from a low privilege user. We also have things like Snap, which is a packaging ecosystem for Ubuntu, where snapd is like a background service that manages and maintains your snaps. We also found a privilege escalation in snapd. And then additionally, if anyone's up for a challenge, the recent cups remote code execution only results in a low privilege execution under the LP user. And there's quite a lot of overlap in the things that we're doing here. So it's entirely, potentially possible that these bugs could be combined in a way that would lead to a remote code execution as root via cups. Obviously, it wouldn't work on the latest version anymore, but on 24.04, it's potentially possible if somebody wants to go ahead and do that. And then, thank you for listening. I think a little bit ahead of time, so I guess we have time for some questions. So this was just after going through all of the various DBus interfaces, and I mean, we all know cups. There's been many vulnerabilities in cups in the past, so it just seemed like a good starting point to look.
Just curious, how long did it take you to go through the whole process?
The whole process was done within probably 2 to 3 days.
Pretty quick.
I don't know yet. I think they're recording it, and the recording will be available at least. And I can see if we're able to publish the slides. But we also have a blog post available on securitylabs.sneak.io where you can also find a written version of this.